English narration output directly. A salt cellar is set on the table between a father and his son. The son reaches out, but the father doesn't place it in his hand. He slides it across the boards, so the son takes it himself. One family. One house. One supper. And a distance between kin that a hand 30 centimeters long cannot cross. You know this silence even without the Amish. You've been cut out of the group chat. Left on read for the third day running. No longer invited where you were always invited. And you sat there, staring at the wall, turning over every last conversation. What exactly did you break, and in which moment? Because it isn't the words that hurt. Words, at least, you can argue with. What hurts is the empty space where a person was yesterday, and the fact that the space says nothing at all. Now stretch that out over years. Sometimes over decades. A man lives 300 meters from his mother, walks past her window every morning, and doesn't eat at her table. A wife falls asleep under the same roof as her husband, hears his breathing in the dark, and might as well be in another world. This is what Amish shunning looks like. They call it Meidung, avoidance. The world watches from the outside and sees cold cruelty. But the Amish know something about it that you don't. And when you learn it, the whole picture will flip back to front. I'm Amos. I grew up among these people, in a district where the church still gathers in homes, not in a building with a cross on the roof. I sat on those benches as a boy, I saw those separate tables with my own eyes. And I'm going to tell you what our old folks don't like to talk about. Not because anyone forbade it. But because it hurts to say out loud, even years later. In 15 minutes I'll show you a few things that outsiders only half understand. What kind of vow a person makes, kneeling on a plank floor. What happens on the evening when your brothers come to your house and sit down at your table. What the Bann itself looks like, the shunning, spoken aloud before the whole community. How the shunned person lives afterward, at supper, in his trade, in his own marriage. What this avoidance is not, because the world fills in half of it on its own. And how the door opens back up. And it always does. Almost none of this costs a single cent, requires no paper, no court, not one lawyer. And the last thing, the one the modern world got exactly backward, I'll save for the very end. Because if you take away only that, you'll understand everything else about the Amish. Come down with me to the plank floor. Right down to the knee. You think you're born Amish? No. You become Amish, as an adult, by your own choice. A child here isn't baptized. He's raised, taught a trade and the scripture, and then, when the time comes, he's let go. It even has a name, Rumspringa, the years when a young person is free to look at the world outside. To get behind the wheel of a car. To switch on a phone. To put on city clothes. To leave for good and never come back. And many do leave, no one is dragged back by the hair. And then, usually between 18 and 22, a person returns of his own will to the meeting house, kneels before the community, and takes the vow. Not to the state. Not to his parents. To the church and to God, to live by the ordnung, the community's unwritten order, until his very last day. And here is where it's worth stopping. Shunning, Meidung, applies only to the one who took that vow. Only to the baptized. The one who left during Rumspringa, who never knelt, he isn't shunned. He broke no oath, because he never made one. He simply left, and the door stays open behind him, as it would behind a guest. It isn't a stranger who's shunned. It's the one who himself said, yes, and then stepped over that, yes. My grandfather put it this way about the day of the vow: you don't sign a paper. You give your word. And a word can't be taken back, it can only be kept or broken. That's why everything that follows sits so heavily on the shoulders. Remember that quiet, willing yes. We'll come back to it more than once. Now imagine that yes is broken. Someone started a car and kept it in the barn. Someone left for another faith. Someone raised a hand against his own. The vow has cracked. You're expecting a trial. An accuser, a sentence, banishment that same evening to the jeers of the community. Well, none of that exists. The first step happens more quietly than anything you can imagine. Someone simply comes to your home. 2, maybe 3. Brothers in the faith, often the very ones you ran barefoot with across the same field. They sit down at your table. They drink your coffee. And they speak with you alone, no witnesses, no record, not one outside ear at the door. This isn't invented to make a pretty story. It's the 18th chapter of Matthew. First go and speak with your brother, one-on-one. The Amish take that line literally, word for word, for more than 300 years running. I saw an old man from the neighboring district do it. I'll call him Levi, that's how we remember him. He went to a neighbor who'd stumbled, not with anger and not with reproach, but with his hat clutched in his hands. He'd sit down with him and talk until midnight. He'd come back the next evening. And the one after that. Not to catch him out and back him into a corner. To persuade him to stay. At this stage the community wants exactly one thing, for it never to come to shunning at all. Every quiet visit is an outstretched hand, not a raised fist. But it happens that every hand hangs in the air. And then the silence at one table becomes silence before all. The Amish meeting house is someone's barn or a big front room. They have no separate church building at all, the service goes from house to house, in turn, once every 2 weeks, and the wooden benches are hauled from farm to farm on a wagon. And on a day like that, after the sermon and the singing without a single instrument, the bishop rises and speaks a name. He puts a question to the community. And if the person still hasn't repented, if after all those quiet coffee evenings he stands his ground, the ban is pronounced. The shunning. Its roots go back to the schism of 1693, when a young preacher, Jacob Ammon, split from the Mennonites over exactly this dispute. He believed that without strict avoidance, faith would soften and dissolve over time. From his name, from Ammon, comes the very word Amish. And the rule is written down even earlier, in the Dordrecht Confession of 1632, in a separate article on avoidance. This isn't the whim of one severe bishop in one particular district. This is more than 300 years of the same order, handed from father to son. And here begins the very thing you stayed for. What does a shunned person's life look like? Not on paper, at the table, in the barn, in the bedroom where it's dark. Sit down with me at this table and watch closely. The family still loves you. You aren't driven out of the house onto the road. You come to supper, and you see they've set a place for you separately, a little off from the common end. Your family eats together, elbow to elbow, and you're beside them, at a small added edge, but no longer with them. No one passes you food hand to hand, that same salt cellar is slid across the boards, so you take it yourself. You have your own trade, you sold a neighbor a cart, the money won't be laid in your palm, it's set on the table, and you pick it up from the table yourself. A husband and wife sleep under the same roof, but whichever of them is under the ban is cut off from that closeness of a shared path that once bound them to the last thread. Notice, nothing is taken away by force. No one shouts, no one curses, no one slams a door. It's just that the invisible, together, that every minute of this house used to breathe simply vanishes. That's what Meidung really is, not a wall as tall as a man, but the distance of an outstretched arm that has suddenly become impassable. You're home. And you're alone. And this is the heaviest loneliness of all, loneliness among those who love you. Sounds like the coldest thing a living person can do to their own flesh and blood, doesn't it? Wait. Don't rush to your verdict. We're almost at the door this was all built for. Let me ask you directly, you, the one listening right now. Is there a person in your life whom you crossed out yourself? Not the community, not a bishop, not an old book, you. Someone you left on, read, forever, looked past at the family table, cut out of your life because they once betrayed you or simply let you down. Write one word in the comments. Not a name, just yes or no. Because in a minute you're going to look at that person with different eyes. The stakes aren't in some strange custom of distant bearded people on farms. The stakes are in what each of us does with the ones we love and who wounded us to the bone. And now, that very door. And the thing the world got upside down. There's a final step that TV shows and articles about the Amish almost never mention, because it doesn't frighten and doesn't tug at the nerves. The road back. The same meeting house. The same bishop. The same benches. But now the shunned person kneels down again, before the very community that shunned him for months, and says aloud that he's repented, that he wants to return under the vow. And do you know how long the restoration takes? Not years of atonement. Not a long probation. One day. Sometimes a single morning. One moment he was eating at a separate added table, and by dinner he's one of them again, back in their arms, and the salt cellar is placed right in his palm again. I saw a return like that myself. I watched stern men who for half a year had taken nothing from his hands embrace him, and tears rolled down their weathered cheeks, on both sides, his and theirs. A distance that had seemed eternal and impassable vanished in a single hour. Because no one ever counted it as eternal. And now I'll say what I promised at the very beginning. Hold on. The modern world looks at shunning and sees punishment. A penalty. Banishment. The community's revenge on the one who dared to live differently. And it's exactly the opposite. For the Amish, Meidung isn't a door slammed in a person's face. It's a door left deliberately, purposely ajar. The empty place at the table doesn't shout, "Leave and don't you dare come back." It whispers every single evening, with all its silence, "We're keeping this chair for you. We're waiting. Find your way back." This whole severe order isn't built to push a person out and forget him. It's built so that a person can't pretend nothing happened, that a vow can be quietly stepped over and life goes on as if nothing were wrong. Understand, too, what it is not. It isn't a prison, the doors aren't locked, leave any minute, no one will hold you. It isn't hatred, you're loved every one of those days, loved to the point of pain, and that's why it hurts. It isn't a curse or an everlasting brand, it's lifted in a single morning of repentance. The world imagines cruelty where there is none, and fails to see love where there is. My grandfather said it in one sentence I've carried with me all my life: we shun not in order to lose a person. We shun so as not to lose him for good. Shunning isn't the end of the conversation between kin. It's the only way to keep the conversation from quietly dying in indifference. The world abandons its own in silence, blocks them, deletes the number, crosses them out forever, with no right of return, and proudly calls it freedom. The Amish hold the one who stumbled on a short rope, drawn taut with pain to the point of wringing, and they call it love. Hard. Uncomfortable. Heavy for both sides. But with an open gate at the end, which the silent block doesn't have and never will. Now look at this whole ladder at once, top to bottom. The vow on your knees, because only what you once tied with your own hands can tear. The quiet visit of the brothers with their coffee, the last, gentlest attempt to hold on to you. The ban before the community, not a sentence on a villain, but an honest admission out loud that the bond has broken. The separate table, not banishment past the threshold, but a visible wound they deliberately won't let go quiet and be forgotten. And the morning of return with tears, living proof that all this severity was, from the very start, for the sake of it, for the sake of that one morning. Every step faces the same direction, home. Take the last step out of this ladder, the door back, and what's left is naked cruelty. Leave it in place, and it all suddenly comes together into one thing: it's a way to love the one who left, without pretending he never left at all. What should you do with all this tonight? Nothing Amish. One simple thing. Pick up your phone and write to the one you crossed out yourself, a single short line. Not forgiveness, not a rehash of who was right back then. Just, the chair at the table is still yours. Leave the door open a hand's width. That's all I'm asking. And in the comments, answer me one question, the answer to which you know without any old book. What's truly harder, to shun the one you love, keeping a chair for him every day, or to let him go in silence and forever, so it stops hurting? Say it plainly, without picking your words. I read every answer. And since you and I have started talking about that vow on the knees, next time I'll show you what happens in those very years when young Amish are deliberately, with their own elders' hands, let loose into your world and mine, behind the wheel, to the phone, through any door they choose to open. Rumspringa. Why a community that is so mortally afraid of losing its own throws the outer gate wide for them itself, and what exactly makes most of them come back of their own will? There's a secret in that. And it's one we don't like to say aloud either. I'm Amos. And now you know it too.